Hi, this is Srinivasa, editor of Herald, speaking to one of the greatest leader in EDA segment, Wally Rhines. He is a veteran and is also established one of the most popular company, Mentor Graphics, which was sold to Siemens EDA, and now he is heading another interesting company, Silvaco, and he knows the industry very well in both the depth and breadth. We are very happy to have him talking to a magazine like Herald. Welcome, Ali, to our talk.
Thanks very much.
Actually, it's very good to see you so often in India, but I don't know, these days you're not that often. I couldn't see, but finally you are in India. At this stage, traveling, it's really great. So I want to get some bites from you on the semiconductor industry. So now semiconductor industry is basically globalized, right? Generally speaking. And due to the COVID, it has taught us a lesson. Some kind of a localization is also happening in the supply chain. They call supply chain resilience or whatever it is. What is your observation on this trend? Whether strategic autonomy driven localization can stay with this globalized industry?
So, globalization is always good. It means that you do things wherever you can do them most effectively with the most skilled labor to produce the best quality of product or have the greatest ideas. We've come through an era of 30 years of globalization, which has created enormous efficiencies, and it's enabled the semiconductor industry around the world. Now we're moving the other way, partly due to the United States. People are becoming more regional. It's for geopolitical reasons that now each individual region of the world now is worried about being self-sufficient. They all want to be able to operate independently if they have to because of disagreements with other countries. Well, this is very inflationary. This is very backward in terms of progress because now everything that we have learned and specialized in now must be learned everywhere else. But it's the world, it's politics, it's the way things are going. We have no choice, so we have to adapt. At one time, for example, every country in the world thought they had to have their own airline. Now, every country in the world wants to have its own wafer fab. Well, it's good for our business because we help people build wafer fabs, we help people design chips, and if 20 different countries want to design competing chips that do the same thing, that's good for the EDA, the electronic design automation industry. That's not so good for the world. It's not so good for the population. It means that people don't benefit from the shared learning and experience of each other, but it's the environment we're in. And this too will pass sometime. But right now, it seems to be the predominant mode.
There are beneficiaries and there are also people who are trying to lose few things, but we can't help it. It's the trend we have to ride on.
That's right. Correct. We have to live with the environment we're given.
There is enough wafer capacity in 2 nanometer now, with 3 fabs and 1 more coming in Japan. However, its capacity comparatively not well utilized. Say TSMC is queued up in many vendors. There is Intel and Samsung, which is also offering world class. I mean, if not yields, or some people questioning yields, but I think they are putting so much effort, and these 2 fabs have enough capacity. So, what is stopping the leading fabless companies moving away from these queued up fabs to these kind of, Samsung or Intel or other things? What is your opinion?
So we go through many waves of semiconductor manufacturing capacity. And actually, over the last 50 years, the good news is that because semiconductor fabrication has become so expensive, it's not as dispersed and diverse as it used to be. In the early days, even through most of the last century, every company was an integrated device manufacturer, an IDM. So they all had their own wafer fabs. So all of these wafer fabs were never fully loaded. They had only as much as that company needed. And so it was really starting in the 1990s that we started sharing that extra capacity. So a lot of companies, particularly in Japan, but even the US, started selling wafers out of their fabs. And then the foundry business emerged. Seiko Epson was probably the first really well-established foundry, but then soon the country of Taiwan decided they needed to be a leader in semiconductors. And because they didn't have a lot of products to produce, they built manufacturing capability. And the two most noticeable were Taiwan Semiconductor and UMC. And because Morris Chang, who had been the head of the semiconductor business for the world's largest semiconductor company, Texas Instruments, was a native from originally mainland China, but by way of Singapore, Morris came back and became chairman and CEO of both companies, TSMC and UMC. But he did. But they had different philosophies. UMC filled its fab with ROMs and RAMs and other things just to keep the capacity loaded. TSMC only built customer designed products. And Morris very wisely hired one of his best employees from Texas Instruments, Don Brooks, and made him president. And Don did a very interesting thing. He standardized and published his process. Because Don told me at the time, I'm very tired of trying to produce products that were designed to be run in someone else's fab. So I'm just going to give everybody my design rules, and then everybody else can struggle to produce designs that were
Don
designed.
Still in TSMC?
Don died a few years ago, but he stayed as president for a long time. And then eventually Morris came back and became president and CEO again. And Morris led the company for the last more than 20 years. But that was a very critical decision early on. Meanwhile, other foundries sprang up, but TSMC, because everyone standardized on their design rules, became the dominant fab. And so initially, they had almost no R&D. They simply hired people who understood the next process. But eventually, they developed their own processes, and soon they were developing more and more advanced processes. And for a long time, they were 2 nodes behind Intel, for example. But gradually they caught up, and then gradually they moved ahead. And the big step came at 28 nanometers. So 40 nanometers was a struggle. There were 3 main foundries, Global Foundries, Samsung, and TSMC. And they all had, both Samsung and Global Foundries had unlimited money. And so Morris, very wisely, said, I know what happens when you introduce a new node and your competitor has more money than you do, you lose market share. So Mentor bet the store on 28 nanometer. He went from spending $2 billion a year on capital to $10 billion to capture most of the 28 nanometer market. That was an enormous success.
That was an enormous success.
That was a bet your company thing. And Morris was over 80 years old. And you say, why would he take a risk like that? And the answer is because Morris was very smart. And Morris said, if I don't do it now, we will not win, because I know. Global Foundries, the Dubai, the Middle East has more money than I do. So does Samsung. So now is the time. And he asked Shang Shang, his head of R&D, what do we have to do to be sure we have the best process at 28 nanometers? And Shang Yi, who was my lab partner in graduate school at Stanford and head of R&D at TSMC, said, that's almost impossible, but you would have to hire 3,000 engineers. And the board of directors said, oh, wow, that's enormous. How much would that cost? He said, oh, that would be over $100 million. And the board thought about it. And they said, this is our business. If we don't do this, we risk losing the whole business. And so they upped the capital expenditures. They hired 3,000 new engineers. They developed the best 28 nanometer process, and the rest is history.
So now Intel and Samsung has some opportunity to get back to their. Samsung is already there to some extent, but Intel as a foundry has an opportunity to get back to kind of a big market share in foundry business. Is there something which they can do now? Opportunity still open? So window is very short now.
Of course, anything can happen, and with the regionalization, if the U.S., for example, is unable to buy from Asian countries, Taiwan, for example, then it would be important to have a foundry like Intel. If that's not true, if you're still able to buy wafers from Japan and Taiwan and Korea, then it's a big challenge for Intel. And the reason is that Intel was optimized around unique high performance processes, which tended to consume a lot of power, and their design group was very independent. Well, the foundry business is a service business. When you work with a foundry, they do everything they can to help you. You know, what design tool do you want to use? If you go to TSMC, they say, don't worry, use whatever you want. What process do you want? TSMC says we have 1,500 different processes. Which do you want?
Wide open.
Now you think about Intel, very focused. That was so important in winning the microprocessor wars. They would have just a few processes, highly optimized, and a manufacturing process that was very efficient. But they only allowed designers to use one particular design tool for each step. And they only had a few choices for a process. And they were very isolated. When you completed your design, it went to manufacturing, very little interaction.
They limit themselves in terms of the wide IP or whatever.
They're
they
very
can support.
partitioned, very siloed. So that's the opposite of what a foundry does. If you work with TSMC today, they're always working with you to see, can they adapt the process to what you need? Can they adapt their flow to what design tools you want to use? They're very flexible. That's going to be very, very hard for Intel to reproduce. So what Intel will have to do is get some very, very big customers and cater to those customers, because they can't have thousands of customers all using different design methodologies. That's a big challenge. And Samsung has done that to some extent and been modestly successful. It'll be an even bigger challenge for Intel to do that.
Let's come to memory skyrocketing. The prices chips are skyrocketing. You have seen that memory market, the extremes going even during dot-com burst in 2000. I think it's a bit of repeat and it's lasting even more. Do you think at the end of the day, sometime in future, the buyers will get some stable memory price? Is there a chance for the memory?
So memory has traditionally been the commodity business of the industry, the most volatile, the least profitable. I was involved in memory back in the early DRAM days, and you could go from unlimited demand to almost no demand overnight because everything was multi-sourced. So people had multiple suppliers. So whenever there was too much capacity, prices dropped. Right now, we are in a tremendous boom. The HBMs, HBM2, 3, 4, are all in short supply. People are clamoring
And
to
they
get
don't
more
want to make
memory.
flash memory. They just want to make HBM and they don't even want to make DRAM. Normal DRAM for pieces, they're not even focusing.
That's right. It's the really artificial intelligence, GPUs, they all demand enormous amounts of memory. And because of that, demand has soared. We have dramatically increased the amount of memory, both in flash and in DRAM. We're moving to 3 dimensions, and yet we can't keep up with the bit growth rate. So there are shortages. And beside that, there are not so many memory companies anymore.
Exactly.
When I was designing DRAMs, there were 22 producers of dynamic
And
RAMs.
Intel used to
And
make DRAM long time back. They came-
Intel was the first DRAM producer with the 1K1103 memory, and yet Intel got out of the business. So did most others, even TI eventually. So we're left with Micron, Samsung, SK Hynix, the primary producers. Well, when you only have 3 companies, then how fast can they invest to build how much capacity, and how much risk are they willing to take? Because it still is a commodity business.
Exactly.
My HBM3 is very much like your HBM3. And so what's going to happen when we finally catch up with demand? So memory people are very smart. They know nothing is forever.
They are smart.
So they will respond to customer demand and build a lot of capacity. But as they see that things are starting to turn, then they will stop equipping those fabs. So you don't spend very much money when you build the building. You spend the money when you put the equipment in the building. And that's what you have to watch for. Probably we will have an overshoot. Probably you will see declining memory prices, but it'll be a while because we are in such short supply now. It's lead times are long, shortages are great, and prices are very
Literally
high.
gold. I mean, close to gold kind of a thing.
Exactly. It's a great business right now.
A bit of question on AI servers. AI servers looks like it's not a bubble, though we have seen previous bubbles. Where do you see this trend heading? Kind of, kind of in the market, and also in terms of end applications after the AI, is a physically going to be a bigger market, or AR, VR, headset market is going to be a bigger market? Any thoughts on this market?
So this is a little unusual for the computer industry. This is a case where the demand is growing far ahead of the actual applications. So people can see that more and more capacity will be needed. So they're out making phenomenal investments in data centers, in power for data centers, trying to create the capacity that will be needed because things like ChatGPT and Anthropic and Gemini and others are being so successful in what they achieve that they can see no limit to the growth. But there are a couple things that happen with this. So, one is you eventually start to catch up with the most profitable applications. So then people are a little more careful how much capacity they put in place. But the other thing that happens that is not fully anticipated is innovation. People will move from traditional GPU architectures and invent new architectures, lower power, more memory efficient. And that will cause us to require fewer servers per token than we thought we needed. I don't know when that will occur. I do know one company that has an architecture that could dramatically reduce the requirement for power and for data centers when they get their chip to market. And there are dozens of other companies innovating.
Can you name that company?
Yes, Cornami.
Konami.
So
Oh, the one
Cornami,
you did that.
yes, Cornami is named for a tsunami of cores.
Oh,
It's a multi-core computer, and yes, it's very efficient and it scales. If you want to double the performance, you just double the number of chips, up to 265 million chips.
so there are plenty of vendors waiting to take on this market. If not
There
plenty,
are,
at least there are a couple of
and,
vendors
and we don't even know what new innovation is coming,
coming.
but I'm sure there are innovations coming that will reduce the power consumption. They will improve the performance. They will greatly improve the tokens per second. And while Cornami, I think, has a roadmap where they could get to thousands of times the performance of today's NVIDIA GPUs, there are probably other companies that have innovative ideas too. And so sooner or later, these two will start to come in balance.
So there's a lot of space for innovation in this area.
Absolutely.
You are the ED expert, no doubt about it. All these questions were more about semiconductor. Your proprietary commercial CAD tools, like whatever the three top vendors, and including Silvaco, and even the silicon IP, is kind of a evergreen market, growing stably compared to other industries, and a decent growth, not like ups and downs like DRAM or any one semiconductor equipment. Where does this emerging open source fit into this? Does it complement, or does it compete, or does it eat into it? Your observation on this?
Well, so far, open source EDA has not been very successful. Uh, and I think there's some good reasons. It used to be when the first Red Hat Linux came out, and there were a lot of open source Linux. In fact, Linus Torvald originally released the first Linux as open source. And people said, the operating system will be free. And a company called Cygnus was formed, and they had a motto on their T-shirts that said, "When free is too expensive." And the answer is
When free is too expensive.
yes. So the answer is free has to come with support, and somebody has to provide that support, and somebody has to be paid to provide that support. And so it's very hard for freeware to generate the revenue they need to keep the freeware competitive, to enhance it, but most importantly, to support it. So if you are a company betting your future on a design and you download some freeware and you build the first prototype, and then you get really serious and start investing money, are you going to trust that the provider of the freeware will be there one day before tape out when your simulation doesn't work?
Very
Who
good
will you
example.
call?
Very good example. Well said. That's the critical stage where these guys need to be present.
That is.
Okay, finally, I think it's important questions. Many Indians, I think designers generally not much aware of Silvaco. They are aware of other three EDA vendors. I really want you to explain where Silvaco fits in their design. I know deep, some of the engineers who know very well they are aware of, but if you look at the large crowd here,
Of course.
so please tell more about Silvaco. What is its plan? Any India plan? Kind of bit on your company and your role in this company.
So you might be interested to know that Silvaco is the oldest public EDA company. 40 years it's been in business. The only company older was Mentor. Mentor was formed in 1984. I'm sorry, in 1981, and Silvaco in 1984. Synopsys and Cadence 1988. So it's a very old company, and yet it's much smaller than they are, but it focused very much on TCAD, on process development and optimization. That was more than half its business. It still is today, but they also developed IP, they developed design tools, they did acquisitions, and so it's grown, but it's quite diverse. It has EDA design tools that are specialized. It has IP that's very specialized. They are probably the premier supplier of the MIPI standard of IP for audio video types of interfaces, but they're niches,
But
specialties.
the TCAD model is quite unique in the market, right? Kind of no other competitors providing similar kind of TCAD models, right?
It's true. There are two primary TCAD suppliers.
Very
There
primary,
is
correct.
Silvaco and there is Synopsys. Synopsys acquired TMA and ISE, so they became larger than Silvaco. But Silvaco was the original creator of the
Original
market
creator.
and was the leader, and still has tools that are every bit as effective. They just didn't do as many acquisitions as Synopsys. So there's a large base of customers who have used Silvaco TCAD for decades and still do. And Silvaco has also specialized more. So they have probably the primary position in wide bandgap, gallium nitride and silicon carbide, and in power designs, for example, and power processes. But much more so, the thing that makes it unique that attracted me to it is Silvaco's the first company to apply AI to process development and to do digital twins and AI driven machine learning to build a model of each process step so you can virtually develop your process, and so a fab engineer can do queries to improve yield or debug a problem in process variation. And so that's going to be the next wave of process development. It's going to be virtual because it takes too long to run prototype wafers, and it's too complex and too expensive. So Silvaco has taken the lead in AI-driven process development. So it's very exciting for me. So that's one of the primary reasons I joined.
A couple of news breaks you gave. It's as old as Mentor Graphics.
Yes.
And also it is one of the earliest in this TCAD, and it is also one of the. It's fast in employing AI in AI
It
kind
is.
of TCAD modeling and all that.
It is.
And if you look at the CFET, it's all handling of atoms, right? The modeling is so important when you go deeper, 2 nanometer and further down.
It is.
And you have huge role to play there, I guess.
I believe, in fact, if you look at the number of process steps in a 2 nanometer process versus a 28 nanometer, it's more than double. And the mask sets are 3 or 4 times as expensive. You have to do it virtually. We have to develop those processes on our computer.
You're kind of a digital twin for nanometer age.
Absolutely. And we have to make the tools easy enough to use that not just the process engineer, but the fab engineer can optimize the process in the fab and do analysis of variation, process capability. Is my yield consistent with the capability of my process? All of those things have not been done with traditional TCAD tools because it took a TCAD specialist to use TCAD tools. Now, in the AI era, you don't have to be a TCAD expert.
Thank you, Wally. It's so
It's a
pleasure to
pleasure.
talking to you. Very lucky to have you. In fact, thank you so much. I can spend days together in talking to
Uh,
you, but let's
I'm
talk
glad to be
again.
here. Thanks.